Last but not least, I would like to talk about Polygon Debug and Quad Polygon Display mode. So whenever you're working, the moment that I cut this face, I've created Ngon. I've also created another Ngon. These faces are all quads, but I've created Ngons. The moment I cut in the middle of a face, like this face is a quad, the moment I cut into it, it's now an Ngon. Everything inside of this is a quad, but everything around this is an Ngon. And there's a lot of ways you can go about solving this. This isn't really to talk about topology, but it's really that easy to create geometry that can be problematic. So we've had a system in HardOps for a long time where you can go under mesh tools and under selection options, you can choose to display Ngons and tries. And we see that with it turned on, we're not able to see anything. And that's until we press Control A and do visual geometry to mesh, and then it'll show, but it's not showing. And that's because we need to actually go in here, hide it, and then go in and actually turn it on again. And now we see in red all the areas that are Ngons. Previously in 2.79, we would be able to work and you would actually see it update in real time as you would mess with the geometry, making it into quads. For example, this area that I just beveled is a quad face, but it's still showing in red. So I have to go here, hide it, and display it again. So toggling that off and on is something that will definitely get old very fast. So I'm happy to announce in this version that we can just turn that off, but there's now an option called Polygon Debug. Of course, this is a V1, so there still may be issues that may be found by the user. But as you can see, as I'm working and applying the modifiers, that it will update in real time, letting me know the status of this particular mesh. For example, if I were to put a bevel on here and then press 3 to change it to a sub-D conversion bevel, now there's a quad edge surrounding all the perimeter, and I can begin dealing with things. In fact, I may want to take this and push it back, and we may want to press Alt-V and turn on Wireframe. It's a little confusing seeing it in a non-derived state showing you status, but this is actually the truth of your mesh. If you have modifiers on it, it won't actually update to let you know, and that's because it'll just get too slow with the depth graph at this time, according to testing. So let's just press Control A, visual geometry to mesh, and we see that everything is now protected by a perimeter. And these perimeters are all quads, except over here we have a little bit of overlap. So the easiest way to deal with that is to just slide this geometry respectively away from each other. Over here we got the geometry just kind of looking a little crooked, so we can just straighten that out. We can grab this whole area SZ and start straightening that out. But now that we have this perimeter that's protecting everything, besides the areas that are skewed, which is kind of strange to see, we can just adjust our snapping, just get these areas looking absolutely right, and more than likely they are skewed because of the lack of guidance edges to ensure that the results didn't get skewed by the guidance of the bevel. So even though you could work a little lazy like this, it still is going to cause some issues, but it's always nice after the fact to go in and just double check and make sure that you don't have any overlap in geometry, because if anything's going to come back and cause you issues, it's definitely going to be some overlapping bevels. That's something that no level of sub-D will solve. So now that we have the geometry looking somewhat adequate, we can actually take this to the next level, which the next level is actually putting a triangulate on it. And let's just apply the geometry, and we see that everything turned yellow, and that's because everything is a triangle. We select everything, we press Alt-J, which should actually turn everything into a quad. I believe it's Alt-J. Maybe it's not. Alright, let's try it again. Select everything, Alt-J, and then from here we can change the max face angle under shape to grab a little bit more. So this is how much we're able to kind of jump to quads. However, at this point, we could try to jump this all to quads, but we could also just put a level of sub-D on it, and because of the way that we've reinforced all our boundaries, the shape's able to hold itself together. And this is like some old school sub-D talk right here about just how easy it is. You can go from Ngons and quads over to a subdivision model. So now we'll go ahead and apply a level of subdivision, and we see that besides a couple of skews in some areas where things just did not work out adequately, we can actually go back a step and see this area about to begin to fall. And so how can we get around such things? So for me personally, I would actually begin cutting loops in this, but as long as we have the derived geometry showing on top, it's going to be a little deceptive. So I'm just going to use box cutter, Control K, jump over to knife, and we can just solve problems by adding problems. 1, 2, 3 at last. And we could even do it one more time right here. And we just want to grab this geometry, turn this off and slide them to. And now if we come out, we look at what our subd is giving us. We can actually turn off wireframe and just look at just the object. However, with the weird shading, it's also a little bit hard to read. So we can go under Q, Mesh Tools, and under Selection Options, just turn off Polygon Debug and just look at the surface. And what we're looking at here is basically a mesh that's on the verge of being converted into a subd friendly mesh. I mean, this isn't like a great trick or anything. This is just Blender in general and how it works with these modifiers and getting things converted, because you apply one level of subd and everything's going to become a quad. And so just by assisting the geometry a little bit, you can actually mitigate it in converting over to being subdivision friendly rather easily. However, you know, topological rules become the law of the land once you begin working like this. In fact, for this area, I just see that just having a region cut out there will just help this hold a little bit tighter whenever it comes to subdivision. But just letting you know that whenever it comes to dealing with topology, that we're beginning to work on some of our debugging and troubleshooting tools. And Polygon Debug, while it is new, it is something that we're working on to try to make the steps of finding and fixing geometry just a little bit easier.